The Nerd Initiative presents the Comic Press Podcast.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Comic Press Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy, as always, here on the Nerd Initiative YouTube channel. Also, before we get into today's interview, I want to remind everybody there's also another stream going on Nerd Initiative right now for a new shoe release. So if you guys are sneakerheads, you might want to go over and check that out too. But without further ado, this next guest, I met them at Gem City Comic Con in Dayton, Ohio, maybe about a month ago, I think it was. And their art book, I am so sorry, everybody. Their art book drew me over to their table, and we got to talking, and we had to have them. I had to have them on the podcast. So, without further ado, and my mush mouth gets me all over the place. Kelci Crawford, how are you today?
I am terrific, and I totally understand. I do this podcasting, YouTube streaming thing all the time. Totally get the mush mouth thing.
Once in a while, it comes out real nice and smooth, and I sound like a real broadcaster. And then every once in a while, it comes out like it's my first episode again. So,
Totally okay.
So, how did Gem City go for you before we get into anything?
Mixed. I actually feel like it went a little mixed for everybody who showed up there. I had a really strong day one, actually, which was really surprising considering that I was like on the back of the floor.
I was going to say that's why I didn't find you till day two, because you were like, they tucked you way back in the corner.
Yeah, which I don't know who came up with the table layout at this show, but it was like myself and like a handful of other people were tucked into the back corner where nobody could see us. My buddy Stephen Hines also had a really bad table placement. Like, he wasn't even in one of the main rows. He was like an end cap in the middle of the floor. And
I was going to say, wasn't he like off to like by himself almost in like a little island?
Yeah, and people kept passing by him and nobody saw his table because they were just like beelining and taking that little like lane that he was in as like a little shortcut. I don't think the attendees,
I don't think it was marked off very well.
It was not marked off really well, no. So, I mean, as far as other conventions go, Gem City was actually the one that made me step back and go, you know what? I'm going to take a break from doing conventions outside of my local area for the rest of the year. Mm-hmm. I'm making an exception for Small Press Expo, because Small Press Expo, I try to make that every year that I get accepted into it. I'm really excited for this year. None of my stuff is even nominated for Ignatz Awards, but maybe one day. But I'm still really excited to go because I have a lot of comics friends who are in the DC area. Looking forward to seeing them again. Really excited to just be hanging out at Small Press Expo. It was great to hang out with the folks at Gem City Comic Con. I had great table neighbors when I was there.
Oh, yeah. Everybody there was awesome. I mean, people at the convention were great.
Oh, yeah.
The staff was super friendly and helpful, too. Like, if you got lost, they were like, it's right over here.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And even one of my table neighbors, I was like, I am a doof and I forgot a water bottle. And he just gave me a sweet tea. And I'm like, bless you. Bless you so much.
That's a dry building that they have that in.
It is. Yeah.
Like every time I walked outside, it was literally, I felt like all the moisture was gone from my body every time I walked in there.
Yeah. Yeah. I had kind of the same sort of problem with Matsuri Con, because that one's held in the Columbus Convention Center. And that's
it's a similar issue.
Yeah. You walk in and you're like, I am now a cactus.
Right. You feel like you're just breathing dust. There's no air there.
Oh, it's Jessica. I know Jessica. Yeah, she's one of my super supporters.
Oh, well, hey, everybody's welcome here on the Comic Press. Mm-hmm. So before we get into the books that you came to talk about, let's get into your nerd origin story. How did Kelci Crawford become the comic book art nerd that they are now?
Couple different ways. So growing up in the middle of nowhere, I did not have a ton of access to comic books like Superman or Batman or any of that stuff. The only access that I had was for comic strips in the Sunday newspaper. And I was immediately drawn to Garfield because it was about a cat. I really liked cats. I was 8 also. So, and I also really liked the, at the time, very surreal sense of humor that Garfield had. It really resonated with me at the time. Then my older sister got into an anime called Gundam Wing, which was on Toonami in the early 2000s. And I was getting to a point where I was like, I want to see if there are other comics that are longer than like Sunday comic strips. And then by some miracle, the local library in the middle of nowhere, I got to reiterate, this is like middle of nowhere, population 200 people at most if you squint.
Right.
They had at their library a copy of the manga Gundam Wing Episode 0, which is the prequel origin stories for the main characters of Gundam Wing. And I'm like, how did this get here? And then I picked it up and I flipped through it. And like, for one thing, it was backwards. It was my first encounter with manga. So it took me a second to adjust to reading it backwards. But as soon as I picked it up, I was like, oh, this makes sense. Oh, the art is so different. Oh, this is a longer story. You can tell longer stories as comics, and that just got me hooked.
No, that's awesome, because especially with it being Gundam Wing, that is like a special place in my heart, because my brother and I, when it came out on Toonami, we were still like little kids, and that was like our jam when it came out. We were like, oh, what is this? You know, that and like Dragon Ball was like our first introduction to anime and manga and all that stuff. He dove in head first after that, and now has an entire room full of Gundam models and manga and anime DVDs. It's just out the wazoo. I've just recently started reading the mangas, so I'm just starting to get real heavy into those. I started with Black Clover, which I've been told was probably a mistake because it's so long, and I didn't realize that when I started.
In fairness, it's better that you started with Black Clover and not like One Piece.
Right. Like, yeah. No, I've heard a few horror stories of people trying to get into One Piece and just being like super overwhelmed.
Yeah. I have had many a discussion with another anime friend of mine, and we have both come to the conclusion that Eiichiro Oda really needed an editor to be like, you need to condense this a little bit. More than just a little bit. But that's a whole other discussion.
Right.
Yeah. Where I feel like that's kind of the opposite problem of like, I have a soft spot for Akira Toriyama because I love Dragon Ball Z. I feel like I am contractually obligated to mention it at least once every appearance that I make. Because I just love this show so heckin' much. I have art on my wall of the characters. Like this was a fan artist doing the Dragon Ball Fighters roster, but I still love it so freaking much. Like, yeah, I love the series. Oh, I could talk about it for days.
We'll have to have you on for a whole other episode then at some point.
Well, you got my contact information, so that should be hard.
For sure. But what we are here to talk about is the legend of Jamie Roberts. Now, before we get into Volume 2, which isn't out yet, can you give everybody a good rundown of Volume 1? Because I have actually not been able to read it either. So can you tell us how Volume 1 starts off, how it gets into Volume 2, and what then, we'll go into what we can expect from that?
Sure. Yeah. So The Legend of Jamie Roberts is about Jamie Roberts, who is a genderqueer person, and their two best friends, Thomas and Daniel. During a pirate raid in Chapter 1, they find this unfinished map from a set of explorers, and they go, hey, why don't we just take this unfinished map and go explore this land and see if we can find any treasure for ourselves? So they retire from piracy from the seas, and in Chapter 1, they find themselves being recruited as bodyguards for a king. And the king recruits them as bodyguards to help protect him on his journey back to his kingdom. During the journey, there are contacts from the resident spirits of this new world. And Jamie has never come across little nature spirits before, but the nature spirits find Jamie and warn Jamie there's a danger up ahead in a little place called Maliwe. And in chapter 4 is when they finally make it to Maliwe, after making a pit stop to see Ragun Basho's friend Egypt. And Egypt finds out all about this, and she's like, oh yeah, there's definitely some shenanigans happening in Maliwe. The chief's been acting strange. Be prepared for some weirdness. And then, in Maliwe, the chief is not acting like himself. The Princess Igie has no idea what's going on. Her father is acting strange. There is no explanation for any of it other than there was a nasty spirit called a Mokta that her father tried to fight. And ever since that fight happened, he has not been the same. And then later that night, Jamie starts to get another vision from another spirit. And that's where volume 1 leaves off. And volume 2 picks up from that. And we find out what's the deal with the chief? Who was it that Jamie was talking to? What is going to go on when we find out who and what is going on? And there's a whole bunch of other stuff, and I don't want to get into spoilers for volume 2, but volume 2 does feature a lot of some of my favorite pages.
So that's where we start with volume 2. What can you tell us about volume 2?
Probably one of my favorite gags, which is there is a dragon who reveals himself. And the dragon reveals himself because there are a slew of Mokta that come out and they start attacking the people during a festival. And the dragon makes himself known because in this world, the dragons came to humanity's rescue to protect them from Mokta. And this dragon starts attacking things. And then at the very conclusion of it, the dragon starts talking to Jamie, and Jamie, who's been talking to spirits, is not that weirded out that there's a dragon suddenly talking to them, but they are weirded out by who the identity of the dragon is. But the dragon's like, how did this happen? And Jamie's like, and spills the beans, which is spoilers. And then the dragon starts to freak out. And the chief, who is now all better, comes up and goes up to this dragon and just goes, son, I need you to listen very closely. Come down, and I have something very important to tell you. And just lays a hand on this dragon's nose and goes, shush. It's one of my favorite gags in the entire comic. That and the drunk party scene.
So it's a dragon, and he's just shush.
Yes. It's just a dragon, and the chief just goes shush.
That's why he's the chief, right?
That's why he's the chief. He can absolutely nonchalantly do that to a dragon whose head is twice as big as the chief himself.
That is great. I love that.
It still makes me laugh. That, and there's other little character moments that I just had so much fun drawing for volume 2. I cannot wait for y'all to read them. A lot of them are very spoiler heavy, so I'm not going to get too much into it. Also, I see Jessica in the chat saying the whole village arc was great. Thank you so much. The whole village arc is actually going to be set up for what happens in volumes 3 and 4, because this story is going to keep going. I'm very excited to see and show how all of this pans out.
So what brought up the inspiration behind this? Because I know on your website and on the back of the sketchbook, well, inside the sketchbook, actually, that I got at your booth, it says like fantasy is your like go-to preferred genre.
Yes, it is.
So is it Now, because fantasy is a pretty broad thing, because I know when a lot of people think fantasy, because that's my go-to within comics is
Mhm.
like high fantasy, but everybody immediately thinks Lord of the Rings,
Mm.
or they think I don't. It's usually something along those lines. The very stereotypical, like super mega. Is there anything like really niche in fantasy that like inspired all of this, or is there anything that you're really into that not a lot of people would think of?
So my love for fantasy started pretty young. My parents were really into different fantasy stuff. Mom read the Dragon Riders of Pern series by Anne McCaffrey.
Mm.
And also the Belgariad and Malorian series by David and Lee Eddings. So I was pretty well surrounded by fantasy novels, even at a young age. I even came across a whole bunch of Robert Aspirin novels that all had very punny names, like myth-in persons or myth understandings, stuff like that.
Oh, super clever.
Yes, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's where my love for puns comes from, is seeing all of those titles and thinking they were the best thing since sliced toast and wanting to incorporate that into my work. So there's that. There's also, when I was a teenager, my younger sibling and I actually played a lot of the Jack and Daxter trilogy from Naughty Dog.
Oh,
Yeah, that
you're
was our
speaking my
childhood.
language.
Yes. That was our childhood right there. We even came up with a gag that eventually spun off into an entirely separate comic that I did. The gag that we would do was either one of us would be playing in Jack 2, and we would be passing by and hearing the occasional like Crimson Guard, one of the bad guys, like talking on their walkie-talkie with another person. And then my younger sibling and I started spinning off dialogue and riffing on it, pretending like we were those two guards. And it turned into Johnson and Sir. And we would be like, Johnson, why are you like this? And it's like, because my love for you knows no bounds, sir. Johnson, this is a paid relationship. Kind of a thing. We just riffed on that, and that spun off into an entirely separate idea that I turned into a webcomic back in like 2013 called Johnson and Sir. And that's, fun fact, that's where that webcomic started. So yeah, Jack and Daxter was
exclusive information here on the Comic Press, y'all.
Yeah, there you go. I'm pretty open about it. I am unabashed about owning up to my artistic inspirations here. I also just find it fascinating to like look at an artist and be like, who are you inspired by? And playing like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon in terms of their artistic influences.
Right.
So I'm hoping that there are other people who have this niche interest, and that's why I'm so open about why it is that I love the things that I do. So yeah, the Jack and Daxter trilogy, big influence. Spyro the Dragon, the original trilogy, also a big influence.
I saw, where were people like you when I was in school? Like seriously.
In the middle of nowhere, in a town of maybe 200 people if you squint.
I was say I'm in Columbus, and I've always been around here. And my graduating class was 2,500 people.
Yeah.
And I had like 3 friends that were into this stuff. Like that was it.
I didn't really have any friends who were into this stuff. There were kids who were like, ew, a girl who's into Dragon Ball Z? That's weird. And I'm like, you're weird. And I'd still be watching
we would have
it.
loved that. Are you kidding?
I know. I love it now. Like I rediscovered it in high school when I was like in a band room and somebody had left behind a copy of Shonen Jump. And I was like, well, if nobody's going to claim that. And it had a chapter from the Dragon Ball Z manga in there. It also had like Hikari no Go and Naruto and a few other things. And I was like, oh, this is cool. And that was when I first discovered the manga that Dragon Ball Z was based off of. And I'm like, this is better than the original anime. What the heck?
That's usually how it goes. Like once I started learning that myself, that's what made me start picking up the manga books. Cause I'm like, if these books are better than their shows, then I want to read the books first.
Yes. That way you can see where it diverges.
Exactly. Cause I'm a big source material guy. I want to know where the original ideas came from.
Yes. Although personal recommendation and personal preference. If there's any interest in looking at Stardust by Neil Gaiman, just stick to the movie. The movie is way more fun.
Duly noted.
Yeah. Although if you are in for a very wild and jarring ride between original book and movie adaptation, Coraline is one of the more interesting cases of that I have ever seen.
Really?
Because the original imagery in the Coraline books is way more haunting and graphic than what shows up in the movie. The movie
I've been trying to hunt down the books for a while. I can't get a hold of them. They go as soon as they get on a shelf.
Yeah, I just borrowed mine from the library. That was
there you
the
go.
only way that I could make it work. Well, I'm in a major city now, so I have a better public library system. Actually, the public library system here won a award for best library system in the United States, so that's cool.
There you go. Shoot.
I love libraries. Yeah.
Well, especially coming from like a smaller area, I imagine there wasn't a lot of comic shops.
No, there were not. No. Like I said, my only exposure to comics at the time was the Sunday Funnies and whatever I could find at the library. Usually the library just had like collected editions of the Sunday Funny comic strips. Mm-hmm. That was how I found Calvin and Hobbes and Gundam Wing Episode 0, like I mentioned. Then when my family and I moved to a slightly bigger town, like the town that we moved to was like maybe like 5,000 people, which by our standards was huge, coming from a town of 200.
Right.
So the library there had way more stuff and a lot more manga, because that was right around the time that library systems were catching on that, if we want to draw in young people, we got to get comics on the shelf. And they started stocking them up. Yeah, so there was
8-year-olds don't want to read a full-blown novel?
Yeah, no.
Wow.
Yeah, so like that was how I first discovered stuff like Paradise Kiss, Peach Girl, there were even some like Korean manhwa that made it onto the shelf, and I had no idea what the difference was, except for, this is printed like English comics. This is different.
Right.
I can't tell if the publisher did this on purpose and reversed it to make it easier for English speaking audiences, or it was originally Korean. That's why. Okay, that makes more sense.
Well, like the first time you encounter manga or like anything foreign like that's like flip-flopped, it's like, what do I do with this?
Right. Yeah.
Because I remember the first time I ever had an interaction with that was actually in a comic book shop. I was like just, thumbing through. I was probably like, I don't know, 6 or 7. And there I pull up this comic book, and it was one of the original Dragon Ball mangas, but it was like, in comic book format.
Sure.
So I got it and bought it, took it home, started reading it, and I'm like, this doesn't make any sense, because I was reading it front ways. I'm like, what is going on? It took me like weeks to realize I had to read it backwards.
Yeah, that's interesting. So did you get one of the ones that was like on the thicker side of things, or did you get
it was like a single issue. Like it was only like a 21 pager.
Yeah, because like that was the interesting thing when I first started working at a comic shop when I was older. This was like in my 20s, like post college. I started working at a comic shop, and that was when I first discovered that Dragon Ball and Sailor Moon were among one of the first comics to be brought stateside. So a lot of the early chapters were made into single issue floppies and distributed that way, rather than like the bound trade paperbacks that we're more familiar with. And sometimes the publishers would flip those single issues for native English readers to read a little more easily. Sometimes they would. It really depended on when that issue came out and like who the publisher was at the time, because like some titles like traded hands like a lot. Rest in peace to all the titles who were in the hands of Tokyo Pop when Tokyo Pop restructured.
Wow.
we're not.
I wasn't even into it at that point, and I heard about that. Like,
yeah, we're not going to get into that right now. That's a whole other video.
That'll bring a whole other crowd of people in.
yeah. Check out
Angry
RedTube
people.
on. Check out Red Bard on YouTube. They have an entire. They have like 2 videos about Tokyo Pop and the mess that they left behind.
Well, it was similar to what happened to comics in the 90s. I mean, you know, the market got flooded.
Yeah.
And then everything bottomed out, and it almost went away.
Yeah, and everybody had to restructure. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the future, especially with web comics coming into almost its heyday here.
I was gonna say webcomics are getting so big now, like because I've noticed that's where a lot of your work is on webcomics. How did you decide to start doing comics in the first place yourself, and then like what made you realize like that was kind of the route you wanted to go with it?
So this starts all the way back in high school. Originally, I took a summer intensive program to learn animation because I initially thought I'll go into animation and then I can work on my own stories. And then I realized that a lot of animation is working on other people's projects. And at the time that I was doing the summer intensive, that was when the industry was really switching from 2D to 3D. And they were trying to teach us Maya, and I could not figure it out for the life of me. I was like, if this is what the industry is moving to, I don't want any part in this.
Right.
So I looked at my options again, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go to, because initially I wanted to go to the Art Institute. Turns out, smart idea to not go.
Really?
Yes. For one thing, they're not accredited. For another thing, I wasn't getting any scholarships to go to that place. And it was like $30,000 per year to go, especially since like they were out of state. And then I found a university that was in state, so it was much cheaper. They had a learning community specifically for arts majors, and they had like animation and comics programs. And I was like, well, I'm just going to go to this one. It was also the learning community that really sold me on it, which was why I went. And I still am friends with a lot of the folks who I went to school there. One of them is in the comments section, actually. I saw them a second ago. So yeah, shout out to Gusty BV. I see you in the comments. After college, actually it was during college, I took a summer job drawing caricatures at a amusement park. I was one of those annoying people that would shout in between roller coasters, screaming by, being like, hey, do you want to sit down for a funny face?
Oh, man.
I was one of those people. Yeah. Got real good at learning how to sell. So I put that to use at a lot of conventions.
Hey, there you go.
Got real good at drawing fast.
I was gonna say, I mean, you sold one to me. So
yeah. Yep, sold one to you. Sold to a bunch of people. I'm probably one of the. I'm not just tooting my own horn here. This is just based on like observation at shows and from what other sellers' feedback has given me. They're like, "You're really good at this. How did you get so good at this?" And I'm like, "I was a carnival barker at Cedar Point."
Right, and doing stuff like that and like this, and you know, just like a lot of my past jobs were involved talking to people. So, you know, once you do that all the time, you just kind of learn how to talk to people, and it gets a lot easier the more you do it.
Yep, and for me, it started at a really early age too, because my parents ran a small business until I was like 11 or 12. So I got really good at answering the phone, saying like, "Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da, how can I help you?"
Oh, yes, I know that speech very well. My grandmother ran a web development company out of her house, and my mother does too. So, yes, I grew up saying that all the time.
You learn to say the business, how can I help you?
Yeah.
That, and we would also help organize a 4th of July fireworks show every year when I was a kid for up until I was like 8 or 9. My younger siblings and I, or my siblings and I, because I have an older and a younger, I am the dreaded middle child. But we would be asked by our parents to go out and ask for donations for the next year's show. And my older sister did not want to talk to anybody else. So she would pass the jar to me and be like, you ask people. And I'm like, okay. And I would just walk up to people and be like, can you help donate for next year's show?
Hey, the little kid with tip jar, that's usually a good way to go.
Yep.
It's hard to say no to a little kid.
Exactly. Yeah. Are you going to say no to this itty bitty face? Why would
Right.
you? Yeah. So real early age, learned to pick that up. Worked at Cedar Point doing the caricatures and the funny faces. Then after that, I took a year to move back home, figure out what I was going to do next, because there was a little part of me that was like, maybe I should submit my portfolio to publishing houses and see who would be willing to pick up my stuff, and wasn't getting a lot of response back. And then I was like, well, webcomics are always an option. I know how to format stuff for putting up on the web and making it into a print book if I wanted to make it into a print book. I just need an idea. That was when my older sister and I got to talking, and she brought up, hey, when you and our younger sibling would do Johnson and Sir while playing Jack 2, that was the funniest thing. You should make a comic out of that. And I was like, okay, I'll make a comic out of that. So I made pages, and then somebody on Tumblr was like, hey, I'm looking for an artist for a new comic project. This is a paid gig. Send me your portfolios. And I'm like, well, I have some pages of Johnson and Sir. Send them over, and got the gig. And that's how I got to work on the webcomic Validation, which ran for like 5 or 6 years.
I was gonna say, I that one ran for a long time. I was looking and scrolling through everything you've been doing before the interview, and I was like, wow, that went for a long time.
It did, yeah. And a lot of the other webcomics that I did, I deliberately kept them short because I wanted to build up the like energy of, I can finish a project. I can do this, because I knew I wanted to work on The Legend of Jamie Roberts, and I knew that one was going to be a beast. So I wanted to build up the momentum and tell myself, listen, you can get a comic project done. You can tell a story from start to finish. Now you have enough titles under your belt. Let's make The Legend of Jamie Roberts. And I'm so happy that I'm doing that and still doing that. And now volume 2 is out on Crowdfunder, looking to get funded. Real excited about that. Yeah, back the project, yo. We haven't hit goal yet, last that I looked, but we are real close. We're like 2/3 of the way there.
So scan the QR code. Go back it.
Yes. The campaign runs through the month of August. I'm already lining up another project for September to run at the same time as Small Press Expo, because Small Press Expo is doing like a special feature that's like, hey, Small Press Expo peeps, if you're exhibiting at our show, if you're running a campaign, we'll help boost it. And I'm like, figure out plans. Because like I'd like to take advantage of partnerships and collaborations.
100%.
Absolutely. It's how anything gets done.
Yeah, like as much as anybody wants to claim, nobody does any of this stuff on their own. There's at least a marketing person somewhere, or a person saying it's okay, calm down, once in a while. There's always another party somewhere.
Yeah. I am so grateful for the comics folks that I've managed to make friends with, because like I don't think you've met him yet, but his name's Ben Wright Human. He shows up at a lot of Columbus area conventions. Okay. He and I are both board members of the Columbus Cartoon Coalition. And that is how we get to know a lot of other comic artists who are based in the Columbus area. Some artists in the coalition are actually also based outside of Columbus. Like we have a member that's based in New Jersey.
Oh, wow.
And And I'm like, how did you find out about us? And it turns out they went to turns out that they went to Columbus College of Art and Design, or CCAD for short. But it's through Ben that I got to meet a bunch of these people. I've also met a bunch of people from the Center for Cartoon Studies and got to meet other cartoonists that way. So, and oh my gosh, those folks have been such a helpline for me when it comes to getting feedback or asking them, hey, am I right in thinking that the vibes are off on this thing, or is it just me? And they'll look and they'll be honest about it.
Honest feedback is so hard to get these days.
Yes.
Everybody who's like friends with you, they don't want to hurt your feelings or something. It's like, if it sucks, please tell me.
Yeah.
So that I can make it not suck.
I actually feel lucky that I have the feedback group that I have. And I'm also really lucky that my siblings and I are kind of our own little writers group, because all three of us are creative. Like our baseline creativity is all of us are writers to some degree or another. And then after that, we also engage in other forms of creative expression. Like some of us play music, some of us are dungeon masters for Dungeons and Dragons. I'm the resident comics illustrator of the house. But anytime that I'm like, oh gosh, there's a story beat and I don't know how to approach a story beat, I usually go to them first, because, historically we've been really good at giving each other feedback. It was actually my older sibling who gave me the idea of making Jamie Roberts and their two best friends pirates. They were originally not going to be pirates. They were going to be something else. But I started going into, hey, older sibling, can you tell me if this plot makes any sense? And I go into the rough outline of it. And then my older sibling just goes, it would be a lot easier if you just made them pirates and you just started the story at this point, rather than going back way back when and, trying to start at the very beginning, just start in media res where they're pirates in the middle of a raid and then they find this thing. That's a better starting point. And I'm like, that is a good point. And
I was going to say, unlike some of the things we read is in the manga world that starts at the moment of birth of these characters.
Yeah. In fairness, I don't think a lot of the manga creators start out as being super duper into comics in the first place. And I'm not sure that many of them get the writing training that they need. Cause fun fact, Akira Toriyama got his start making advertising art. He was not a writer.
Not at all.
Not at all. But he really liked telling jokes and he liked drawing art. And he's actually come out in interviews being like, okay, so I drew this character. Oh no, I have to draw them again? Oh geez, okay. Oh gosh, I gotta draw them again? Okay. It just keeps going.
My favorite are interviews with him where he's like, oh yeah, I just forgot about that character.
It's such a common thing with him. He just forgets characters, and I'm just
my
over
favorite
here
example of that is I heard what was her name, Marin?
Yeah, Marin.
He just stopped putting her in episodes one day because he said, I just forgot about her. I forgot I even created her.
Yeah, that tracks. In fairness, that is kind of in keeping with the original Journey to the West, because Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z started out as a parody of Journey to the West, and Journey to the West also just flat out forgot about a lot of the characters that they had. They forgot that the horse was originally a dragon and just took on the form of a horse. And then it was just a horse for the rest of the story. I'm hoping not to make that same mistake in the comics that I tell. Like, if I'm going to introduce characters, I want them to have a point.
Well, as long as you don't introduce too many characters, I
No.
think that's where some of these creators like kind of slip up, where they like
Yeah.
have so many moving pieces that they literally just lose some.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. And again, that goes back to going back to your inner circles for feedback and being like, I'm thinking about either replacing this character or removing them. Does this make any sense? And like, you know, getting the feedback that you need to determine whether to do that or not. Like there was another character in The Legend of Jamie Roberts in early drafts who was going to show up in Maliwe and then just stick with the party. And then as I was working on later chapters, I was like, this character isn't doing anything. So I'm just going to remove them and we'll go from there.
Well, you know, sometimes you got to trim the fat off, right? Like
Absolutely. You got to get to the most important bits. And I feel like with The Legend of Jamie Roberts, the most important bits for me are the friendship between Jamie, Thomas, and Daniel. They're two friends. Like those character dynamics are the most important thing for the story, and it's what I want to focus on. That and just I'm also having a lot of fun with the world building. I get to finally flex the stuff that I learned from because I took like 2 semesters of African art history. So there's a lot of like in some of the panels in volume 2, there are masked dancers, and I pulled a lot of artistic influence from like the Abomina people and the Dogon people, who are both based out of Burkina Faso and Mali. And I wanted to be respectful. I didn't like copy mask for mask, like
right.
what the looks were, but I looked at the vibe and I was like, I really like the vibe of
Also, more just trying to get the style down, not necessarily a carbon copy.
Exactly. And actually, fun fact, the dragon who's popped up a couple of times, he's based off of an African mask called Warakun. Warakun is worn by men's society dancers, in the name of the culture escapes me, but if you look up Warakun, I'm sure it'll pop up. But Warakun is originally a witch hunting mask. And legends say that the mask breathes fire for anybody who wears it. And I looked at the original mask and I'm like, that's a dragon. And I was like, that's a really cool dragon, but it's a dragon. So the dragon that appears in volume 2, a lot of the aesthetics of it are based off of Warakun, or at least some of the variations of Warakun that I've seen in the limited like spans that I had to check out those masks and really study them.
No, that's so awesome. So how long is this crowdfunder still going for? You said until the 1st? Until
September 1st. Yes. The fun thing with crowdfunder is that I would need to go in and manually tell the system to end it, because if I don't, it'll just keep running.
So, you know, if you're running a minute or 2 behind on the deadline, just shoot Kelci a message.
Yeah.
And, you know, they'll be able to get it, you know, delayed a little for you.
Yeah, I could delay it a little bit. It may not be like September 1st at 11:59 p.m. like on the dot. It's probably not going to happen. But you know, it's running until
like 6-ish.
Yeah, it's running until September 1st.
There it is. Scan the QR code if you guys wanted back Legend of Jamie Roberts Volume 2. And scan this QR code if you want to check out Volume 1, because you're probably not going to really know what's going on in Volume 2 if you don't pick up Volume 1. So you better go get Volume 1.
Yeah. Volume 1 will also be available in a PDF and physical form on the crowdfunder as well, for anybody who might be a little concerned about backing Volume 2. There are copies available. So there you go.
See, there it is. You don't have anything to worry about, guys. So before we get out of here and I let you go, because I don't want to take up your entire evening, is there anything else you want to plug? Any, you know, upcoming conventions, anything like that, or any other projects that you want to kind of plug real quick?
Yes, please. I need to get to my pizza.
Well, geez, I don't want to keep you from your pizza. So
how could you keep anybody away from their
that's
pizza?
what I'm saying.
Yeah. So, places where you can find me. Obviously, you can find out more about the Legend of Jamie Roberts by going to thelegendofjamieroberts.com. I also have a official website for the little production company that I run, because I run my own independent printing label for comics and keychains and other merch. You can find that at fantasyvilleproductions.com. Everything that I do will be on my main website, which is on the screen right now, kelcicrawford.com. Links to everything: the Legend, the Crowdfunder, Fantasyville Productions, all the other webcomics that I have done or am doing. All of that is going to be there. And if you're still on social media, links will also be there. But I also have a YouTube channel. Links for that will also be at kelcicrawford.com.
Yep. And in case you're just, don't want to go to the website, you can go right there. There's a screen name for Instagram. You can follow Kelci there as well. Mm-hmm. And right before we get out of here, I do want to remind everybody that this coming Friday is the next episode of Fandoms Live at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The next live episode of the Comic Press will be August 25th at 6 p.m. Eastern. Every Wednesday, make sure you stop by nerdinitiative.com for all your new comic book day reviews starting at 9 a.m. and going all throughout the day. And then, of course, the next episode of our newest comic book related show, Turn a Page, is going to be airing August 22nd at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is Jeremy. Kelci, thank you so much for coming on. This was so much fun.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Not at all. And once again, everybody, as always, please be safe, be kind, and take it easy.